Let me tell you a story. True story. It is the late winter of 1540, now, so that's about 500 years ago, and a large Spanish expedition under the command of Francisco Vasquez de Coronado moves north from the city of Compostela on the central coast of Mexico. This is near the current city of Puerto Vallarta. It was a huge expedition for that time. The expedition was going in search of the 7 bejeweled cities of Chabolas, cities that are supposed to have jewels inlaid in their gates, and were supposed to have storehouses full of gold and silver. Seven cities. The expedition moved north through the current Mexican state of Sonora, into what is now Arizona and western New Mexico. By summer, they had encountered no bejeweled cities. And upon coming across one Pueblo settlement, they attacked it, only to find the only thing stored there was dried corn and pinto beans. So the commander was pretty discouraged. So then he dispatched several small reconnaissance teams. One of these teams, of about a dozen men, was led by a young captain named Don Garcia Lopez de Cardenas. This party was dispatched to the north and west across what we call the Colorado Plateau. So it's desert, but has some sparse forests. The party moved through there looking for anything of value. And also there was a rumored desert river, great river. So they were going to see if they could find that. One day in early October, they came out of the forest and the sparse vegetation, and they encountered the Grand Canyon. Now this painting, this is a very interesting painting. It's done by a hyper-realist naturalist painter named Augusto Ferrer Dalmau Nieto. And I looked at it and I thought, wow, a couple 100-year-old painting? No, actually, he's contemporary. He's a contemporary hyper-realist painter. Does a lot of paintings now for Spanish military history, both historic and current. Sometimes he even goes into the field with the Spanish military embedded with them. The next slide shows approximately where they think he came out. This is Desert View. It's a very popular spot. You can see all the Presbyterians gathered at the rail. Okay. Looking down into the Grand Canyon. Now the Grand Canyon would have been unlike anything Cardenas and his men had ever seen. Grand Canyon is so long and so deep that the entire Pyrenees mountain range, which is the mountains that divide Spain from France, would fit in them without the rims even coming up to the level of the Colorado Plateau. The Grand Canyon, the size is just unfathomable. Now, Cardenas and his men moved along the south rim for several days, and initially Cardenas said, well, the river, I don't think it's wider than 8 feet. And the Indian guides that were with him said, no, it's very broad. It's essentially hundreds of yards wide. No. So we dispatched another of his junior captains and a couple of soldiers. They found a point of ingress to the canyon down to get a closer look. They came back sometime later, said they were only able to get part the way down, but what his native guides had told him was true, that the river was massive, and the columns of stone in the middle of the canyon was massive. Cardenas and his party were probably the first Europeans ever to see the Grand Canyon. And the chroniclers of the broader expedition don't give us a clue, recorded nothing about what their visceral reaction to the canyon was. But of course, they found no cities of gold. Now, to us, you and I, it's frankly very rare that we run across anything that is so completely new that we have a hard time grasping it. That's a rare event. In fact, one of the advantages of us getting older is that we have more and more experiences against which to compare new experiences to old. In fact, that process, comparing what we've seen to the new, is buried right in our language. If you had a friend who went to a place, say Hawaii, that you had never been to, you'd likely ask this key question. Key question? So tell me, what is it like? The key word is the last word, like. Already inherent in the question is this idea that they have to compare it to things you might have already seen. What is it like? So for Hawaii, they might say, well, it's like Santa Cruz or Pismo Beach, but a lot more tropical vegetation. It rains every day. And some of the beaches are black, the black sand. But what happens when you run into a concept, something of such a scale or complexity that you're at loss for words? This is God's challenge. This was God's challenge. You see, God is spirit. He's neither male nor female, but probably the best of both. He's all good, all merciful, all just, all wise. He's omnipotent. He exists out of space. He can be more than one place at a time. And the part that really bends my mind, he exists out of time. He knows the future, and so on. How does God communicate his essence to limited creatures like us and in a way that we can make practical use of the knowledge? How would he do that? Well, our scriptures today is the opening of John, and it's theologically probably some of the densest theological paragraphs in the Gospels, and I'm just not qualified to unpack it. However, there is a key concept that is approachable and core to our faith, and let me reread a couple of those phrases. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. For the Lord was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with God, has made him known. The Son of God came and lived with us. Now, key points. Jesus dealt with us. He was full of grace and truth. No one had seen God, but people actually saw and recorded how Jesus lived and interacted with people of all kinds. So the solution God chose to show his essence to us, when you pause to think about it, was brilliant and practical. God sent a part of himself, incarnate as a human being, to live amongst us as an example. And that incarnation was Jesus. Now, the Gospels give us many stories of how Jesus interacted with people. And when you study these stories, many of them are socially very complex. He did not live in simple times, just like we don't. And Jesus also told some seemingly simple but carefully constructed stories, his parables. When we study these stories of Jesus and his parables deeply, we find that there are nuances that would have been caught better by his contemporaries, by the people back then. Mixed in the stories of the parables, you often find some humor, some puns, some serious and complex interaction with people, and some serious and complex interactions, and sometimes you find emotions both from Jesus and other people. It's a mixed bag of stories. Jesus tells stories about farmers at work, fishermen, robbers and a good Samaritan, an honorable centurion, a Roman, faithful priests, but also disingenuous religious leaders, rich men and beggars, the politically powerful, the Roman rulers, and the powerless. But behind all of those stories, the stories have basic teachings. Let me give you some examples. In John 2, Jesus is recorded as having a complicated but touching interaction with Mary, his mother, who comes to him when they're at a wedding in Cana and asks and tells him that the hosts were running out of wine. This was a great embarrassment. What could you do? And after they go back and forth, even though he at first says, well, it's not my time, he does his mother a favor and he turns water into wine. In John 19, in contrast, he shows his very deep concern for his mother in that one of his last utterances from the cross was to request his disciple John take care of Mary, his mother, who's standing right there. Very, very human story. Jesus repeatedly in the gospel demonstrates compassion. He heals blind men, lame men, lepers. Some come back and thank him, some don't. Doesn't seem to matter. In Matthew 21, Jesus graphically shows his deep concern for the sanctity of the Jerusalem temple when he drove out all the money changers from the outer court. Jesus demonstrated love for children in Mark 10 when he directly instructed his disciples not to hinder the children to come to him and noted their special faith. In Matthew 22, this one is particularly interesting. Jesus handled the sensitive issues of whether it was right to pay the Roman imperial tax by noting Caesar's inscription on the Roman coin and says, "So give back to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's." And there are numerous stories in the gospel that include instructions on complex issues about wealth and resources, some of which you have to puzzle on a bit, such as the parable of Lazarus the beggar and the rich man. Note too that the gospel writers chose to include in their writings. They did not leave us a collection of the sayings of Jesus of Nazareth. Simple quotes. Rather, they left us collections of stories that included not only what he taught and preached, but also how he lived and interacted with people. They clearly thought his way of living was as essential to us for our understanding as what he preached and said. Now, we know that truth already. It's a common idiom. Actions speak louder than words, right? Andrew Carnegie, the rich industrialist, said, "As I grow older, I pay less attention to what men say. I just watch what they do." Think of someone in your early life that positively impacted you. A parent, a coach, a teacher, maybe even a boss. Do you remember their words years later? Or do you simply remember that you felt understood and dealt with fairly? And if they were close friends, dealt with even lovingly? The Apostle Paul emphasizes in his letter to the Hebrews that Jesus understands us, including our troubles, challenges, and at times our failings, and our need for mercy and grace. Paul says in Hebrews 4, "Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest," that is Jesus, "who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses. But we have one who was tempted in every way, just as we, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. So, my friends, as we move through the gospel scriptures in the coming year from the lectionary, let's resist the temptation to get too theological. But take note, too, not of just Jesus' words, but of his actions, his temperament, his emotions, his humor. Jesus made the sacrifice to be born and live as one of us, both with its enjoyment and with its grittiness. So we in return should learn not just from the words, but his mode of living. May we take to heart Christ's example of living, and may our daily actions demonstrate what we learn of the incarnate Christ and the indwelling Spirit.